forward on this computer. Yeah. So, okay, I'm muting all. Okay, here we are on Monday, 7 December, at least in India, a little after 6 p.m. in the year 2020, the year of the pandemic. And this is the Monday, the first Monday of the month storytelling series. And we are going to have our first storyteller, who is going to be Donna. So Donna, will you please introduce yourself and your story and take the stage? Oh, and by the way, I'm sorry, before you begin, I leave it up to everybody to enlarge the picture of the storyteller if you want to. Two ways to do that, or you can pin the person's image by going to her rectangle and clicking on the 3 white dots on the upper right corner, and then there's an option for pin. The other way to do it is to, on the upper right corner of the whole screen, choose speaker view. But if you do that, anytime anybody coughs or moves something on their desk, it'll move to their image. So if you want to concentrate on the performer, probably the best thing is to pin the person's image. Okay, Donna, pardon me for interrupting you. Please go ahead.
No problem. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from Toronto, Canada, and I live in a province called Ontario. Now, Canada is a bilingual country. Some parts are more bilingual than others in English and in French. And I live in Ontario, which is largely considered English, but really there's a huge Francophone population here. And there's one area that a lot of us travel to in the summers because it's on the Great Lakes. It's very beautiful. And when we go there, there is some, is it possible to mute everyone, Eric? Just, sorry. Yeah, it's okay. I'll just keep talking. I'll just keep talking. So there are some really good land for growing crops in one of the French regions. It's called Penetanguishene. And there it's noted for its ability to grow pears. Strangely enough, we do have pears in Ontario. And the ones that come from that region are called Flemish beauties. And they're really, really delicious. And there was one farmer there whose name was Père Poirier. I mean, his name was Mr. Pear Tree, basically. And he grew the best pears anywhere, the best pears in the entire region. They were so good, and everyone knew they were the best pears. Everyone knew they were the best pears because no one had ever had one before, not in that region anyway. I mean, Père Poirier's pears were so good, he wouldn't even set up a roadside stand to sell them on. He would export them all to a guy in Toronto who would sell them at farmers markets. They were really in demand. Well, people were dying to eat his pears, but Père Poirier, he guarded them so preciously that he built himself a little hut, a cabane, and he would sit there when the pears were at their ripest, just before picking. He would sit there, and he even had a gun, a fusil, on his lap, and he made it so that everyone knew he had that, so no one came to take his pears. One night he had dinner, his wife made him a lovely dinner, she went up to bed, he went up to bed, and in the middle of the night, he woke up, suddenly sat up. He could sense that something was wrong in his orchard. And so he got out of bed, ran downstairs, unlocked the door, 1, 2, 3, the 3 locks on the door, opened it, and saw in front of him a white apparition. And he walked towards it, and it turned and looked at him. And it was a woman with long, white, stringy hair, an emaciated face, and long, pointy fingers and pointy fingernails. And she pointed one at him and said, Père Poirier, je vais dévorer toutes tes poires. Père Poirier, I'm going to eat all your pears. He was terrified, but brave. He took 1 step forward, 2 steps back as she walked towards his orchard. 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, until he was back on the threshold of his door. And his wife, she grabbed him by the shoulder, pulled him in, locked the door, 1, 2, 3, sat him down at the table. And then she went to the placard, the cupboard, and she counted these little bottles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. She took the 7th bottle, pulled out the stopper, and poured it over his head. Because what else do you do when you see la birette, la femme de diable, the devil's wife, but pour holy water all over the head of the person who's seen that? And then she went to bed. But Père Poirier, no, he didn't go to bed. He stayed up all night, his head in his hands, just waiting for those first rays of dawn to come through the windows. And when they did, he went outside and he walked to his orchard. And the sight just devastated him. There was not a single pear left on any of the trees, not a one. His whole crop was destroyed. His whole livelihood for that year was gone. And his walk back to his house seemed longer than it had when he went to the orchard. And he got inside and he sat down at the table. And when his wife got up, there he was, still unmoving at that table. And she went to the placard. And she said, would you like coffee? No. Breakfast? No. So she reached in the placard and took the first bottle. And she handed it to him. And he unstoppered it. Now, he had done this every day of his life, as long as he could remember. It was eau de vie de poire, pear essence. And he swore that's what made him strong and kept him young. And he unstoppered the bottle. And when he did, out came a little tourbillon, a little tornado. And a little man sat, perched on the edge of the little container. And he looked at that little man, and the little man looked at him and said, Bonjour, Père Poirier. Bonjour. Who are you? Well, I'm the spirit of the pears, and I'm here to help you. I know what happened last night, and there's nothing I can do about it. Your pear crop is destroyed for this year. But I can help you with next year's crop. I'll teach you something, and it'll keep your pears safe. You won't need your cabane, you won't need your fusil. This is what you need to do. You need to say, whenever anyone approaches your pears, as soon as the hand touches the pear, you say, poire, 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 tuticole, poire, 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 tuticole, sans rien y avoir. You stick to the pear tree, you don't get anything. That's what it means. And Père Poirier, he repeated it and repeated it until he learned it. Poire, 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 tuticole, poire, 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 tuticole, sans rien y avoir. And the little man said, when you want someone to come down, you just clap your hands and they'll come down. And Père Poirier said, merci. And the little man said, au revoir, and disappeared into the bottle. Well, Père Poirier took his eau de vie de poire, and indeed it was a rough fall, a rough winter for him and his wife, but they managed. And the next year, sure enough, it was exactly as the little spirit of the pears had told him. His crop was beautiful. It was exquisite. The pears seemed even better than they had the year before. And Père Poirier believed what the little spirit of the pears told him. And he took down his cabane and he put away his fusil, his gun. And all the neighbors heard about this. He was no longer guarding his pears. Well, people heard about this for miles around, counties around, the country even. And one day, Père Poirier was out tending to his garden when he saw a dark, dark cloud. And he looked up, and he did what every good farmer does. He went into his home and went and looked in his farmer's almanac to see if there was an eclipse. No eclipse. So he went back outside and looked and listened, and he heard buzzing. And he looked up, and there were millions of hornets. They'd heard about his pears not being guarded anymore. And they flew in from all over the country. And at 3:52:41, the head hornet said, Gweb, attack! And all of the hornets descended on the pears and covered them. And Père Poirier waited until the last one had settled, and he went, poire, 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 tuticole, poire, 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 tuticole, sans rien y avoir. And he walked away. And those hornets, they dried out, died, just hung on to those pears until a wind came by and whoosh, blew them all off. Well, the next day, 3 young boys who'd heard that Père Poirier was no longer guarding his pears were so excited they could finally get to taste a pear. and they crept through the tall grass up to the pear tree. One by one, they jumped up to grab a pear, and Père Poirier came out of nowhere and sang, "Pois, pois, pois, tuticole, pois, 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 tuticole, sur rien et voir." And those three boys were stuck hanging on those pears. And he walked away and left them until they dropped. No. He waited about 15 minutes and he clapped his hands. The boys came down off the tree and ran away as fast as they could and never spoke about it to anyone. Well, the next morning, Père Poirier got up early, as he always did, and he heard a knock at the door. He went to the door. He knew who it was. He knew. He was ready. He had a little suitcase prepared. And when he opened the door, there was a man, thin, ravaged face, hollow eyes, looking at him and said, "Bonjour, bonjour," said Père Poirier. The man looked at him and said, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said Père Poirier. "C'est ma mort, you're my death. And I'm all ready for you. Look, I have my little valise." And he held up his suitcase. Because in that region of Ontario, the older people there, they believe that they know when their time is coming. And they get ready by packing a little suitcase. And Père Poirier followed his death out and through the orchard. And when they got to the orchard, it was just at that time when the pears were beautiful and ripe. Oh, and Père Poirier looked at his death and said, "Would you mind if just before we leave, I take one last pear?" And Death said, "I don't have that many clients today. Go right ahead." And Père Poirier, he took a pear and took a bite. And when he took a bite of that pear, the juices ran down his face. Oh, his face was suffused with joy and he looked younger. And his death looked at him. He said, "Père Poirier, would you mind if I tasted one of your pears?" And Père Poirier said, "Well, of course. There's enough left for my wife for the crop. Help yourself." And just as Death's hand reached that pear, Père Poirier said, "Pois, pois, pois, tuticole, pois, 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 tuticole, sur rien à voir." And he walked away. Now, when you drive through that region, Père Poirier lives on the Chemin de la Fontaine and Chemin de Loup. And if you drive by there, if you're ever in Canada, and if you look there at the corner of a pear orchard, there'll be a tree that may have a huge black shadow on it. And if it has a huge black shadow on it, just drive on by. No, in fact, don't drive on by. If it has a huge black shadow on it, stop. If you go around 8:15 in the morning, Père Poirier, knock on his door, tell him I sent you. He might even give you a little bit of his eau de vie de poire. But if you drive by and there's no dark shadow on that tree, then you'll know that Père Poirier has decided it's time. And he's walked to the tree, clapped his hands together. And with death, he's walked off into that land all of us will one day visit. And that's the end of the story of Père Poirier and the pears.
Wonderful.
Very nice, Donna. Very, very good story and excellent narration. Too good. I loved it. Very nice.
Thank you. I love that.
It was very easy to suspend, the rational demands for rationality and just go along with the story and the supernatural elements. It was easy.
It's lovely because when you tell a story, every part of it is real, right? Especially when you've lived with the story for a long time.
Somehow you made it real. And, I was drawn in, I think we were all drawn in at first, considering the luscious pear. Now, I'm from the USA, but now I'm settled in India. In the USA, I had a lot of luscious pears, where they're kind of getting soft. And in India, well, sometimes you get pears and they're a little green, right? That's a different type of pear. But a luscious pear is something else. And it is a magical, delicious thing. So I was drawn into remembering the luscious pear. So that was a good way to start the story, to appeal to our senses and get us in that sensory mode.
And with
then,
the pen,
go ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, you go ahead.
I was just saying, with the pandemic, I couldn't get out to the farmers market because I'm in the at-risk category. So I missed the Flemish beauties this year. It's so sad.
Oh, you actually go and do you pick the pears, or you just get them roadside?
I just get them roadside. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there were three supernatural characters, right? The first one was the devil, who just came and destroyed things for no reason, right?
La Birette, the devil's wife. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, it's the devil's wife.
Yeah.
And she just came because she was jealous, or why did she just
That's
like
what
that?
she does.
That's what devils do.
She sees someone who's successful and goes, I'm going to take this away. Especially because he loved his pears so much and he guarded them so jealously. She knew that would really hurt.
Oh, so he was a little prideful.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, imagine you live in a neighborhood and you won't let anyone else in that region taste your pears.
Well, he didn't even sell them?
He wouldn't sell them, not in that area. He sold them to
Okay, so he was
a guy from Toronto.
So he was kind of asking for it. He was setting himself up for a fall.
He was.
Okay, so the first supernatural was the devil's wife, who just devastated the crop. But then the pear spirit came and gave that wonderful song of protection.
Yes.
And then finally, the spirit of death came. But he was able to fool the spirit of death, right? Or he was able to, just like the hornets were. Whoops, someone got off their mute, wasn't supposed to. The hornets were killed, and I'm glad that the boys didn't get killed. They easily could have been killed too, because it was a similar situation, right? They could have been dried out and killed, but the story was kinder to the boys. And
he may have been prideful, but he wasn't wicked.
And then that death figure is still there, might still be there, right? So we have to be careful when we travel, when we visit, to avoid that figure, because that kind of negative energy we might attract that kind of negative energy to us too.
I don't know. I'd be willing to go and have some of that eau de vie de poire from Père Poirier.
You'd be willing to risk it.
I'd be willing to knock on Père Poirier's door. Yeah.
But we wouldn't do it in a prideful way. We would do it in a humble way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very good. So it was a drama it's a character drama, because he began a little bit too prideful, but then he was crushed, and the spirit came to his rescue. And then he used that pear spirit song to defend himself against death at the end.
Yes. Something I find interesting is that the pear spirit was so fond of him that he wanted to save him and help him. It wasn't like he said, why are you being so selfish? Share your pears.
The pear spirit appreciated the man's love of pears.
You're right. You're right. That's what it is.
So the man's sincere love of pears won out over his negative possessive energy. His possessive energy attracted the devil and the devil's wife, but his sincere love of pears attracted the pear spirit.
Thank you, Eric. Yes.
Thank you. I'm ready for a pear. Anybody else? Any thoughts, comments, questions, resonations?
I'd like to say, if I may, Donna, that I agree with some of the comments I'm seeing in the chat. I think your pacing was lovely. You just took your time with it, and that let us take our time with it and see and feel and even taste it. And I think, what was it, Jennifer put in the chat about the blending of the French and the English. And I think that's especially important in this on a platform like this, where we are all around the world, and we are, by definition, a very multilingual group. And I think probably many of us speak a variety of languages, and I just thought it was very smooth the way you kind of played the language and tossed in the French, and just very, very naturally told us what it meant. So I really appreciated just the pacing and the blending of the languages too.
Here in India, of course, people throw in a little bit of Hindi, a little bit of Tamil, in a similar way. But if there are people in the audience who don't understand that language, it's kept to a level where you can still follow the story, even if you don't know that other language.
Donna, can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I found myself wanting the song to be, I mean, you did translate the song, but I wanted to be able to sub-vocalize the song in English. So I would suggest that maybe expand that so that if you sing the song par 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 and then go pair 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 pair, and then I know some French, but if da da da, da, so that I can hear the song in English as well. You know what I mean? Not just translating the meaning of it, but I think you could take the time, and so when you sing the song, to sing it in English as well.
That's a terrific idea. Thank you so much for that suggestion, Barry. I'll do that. Yeah, thank you. Because I know when I tell here, there's a lot of people who don't speak any French either, and they would probably appreciate that too. Thank you. Thanks for your comments and the suggestions. And I've not been able to read the chat yet, but I will.
Yeah, there's a lot in the chat. Somebody knows a German poem that is somehow related. And somebody said the story was told in a very visual way, which is true. We could see everything.
Well, I also wanted to say, if I may, that I appreciate the fact that there was a gun in the story. And, often, I mean, there's a saying, if there's a gun on the stage in the first act, then in the third act, someone's going to get shot. And I appreciate that didn't happen. The gun was put to the side.
Well, I think the devil's wife coming was a kind of punishment for the gun. That's how I took it. That his violent energy attracted that violent destruction of the crop. But then, fortunately, he put it aside and used the song to defend the crop, which is a less violent way to do it.
Except for the hornets.
Yeah, the hornets didn't do too well. But we don't sympathize too much with hornets. Maybe we should.
Go ahead.
Somebody began. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for your comments and for listening and for letting me go first, because I was really nervous. So now I can listen to everyone's story without being nervous. Yes.
You're a pro. You didn't seem nervous at all. I mean, a pro in the best sense. You seemed totally relaxed, and as Barry said, your pacing was just it flowed very beautifully.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Mangalam, I think, is still not here, but our second scheduled storyteller is here, all the way from the Philippines. Is that correct, Maricris? You got to turn your mic on.
Yes, I'm from the Philippines.
Wonderful.
Hello, good day to everyone. Good evening here.
Yeah, so please introduce yourself and the story and tell us.
Yes, I'm Maricris Basto. I'm from the Philippines, as I have said. I'm a teacher here. And this will be my first time to tell a story. But I do use storytelling during my classes. But since this is my first time, I really feel not so confident about it. In fact, I prepared a script here. And when I came in, Donna was doing the storytelling, so it made me more cautious. More fearful about the idea that I will be telling the next story. So please bear with me if at times I might be looking at my script here. So my story is entitled "In Memory of the Merman Who Wooed My Great Grandma." This is a story that was about my childhood, It's a story about a merman who courted my great grandma, according to the story told by my grandma. So let me start. So when I was a child, I was probably 5 years old then. My family lived next to the house of my grandma. My parents were full-time office workers, so they worked 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So every time they would go to work, I would be at my grandma's house. My grandma, I call her nanay, which is our local term for mother. So during my childhood days, she literally became my mother because I spend more time with her, sleeping, playing, studying, than with my real mom. My grandma's house sits just along the highway, so during daytime it might get noisy, but during nighttime it's a very quiet place, and you can't stop yourself from wandering. One weekend evening, my mother had to work overtime at home. So she brought home a lot of paperworks, and I could remember she was so busy that I could not get to talk to her. I could not get her to listen to me when I want to say something. That was the first time that was the first night that I had to go on a sleepover. Luckily, it was just in the next house, which is my grandma's house. Nanay, or my grandma, told me how happy she was that I will be sleeping there for the night. She couldn't hide her excitement that night. She told me mommy would usually be so strict about sleepover. When she said that, I realized that my mommy, or my real mom, was not a bad mom after all. She probably was just so busy during the day, but still wanted to always make up during night after work. So all of a sudden, I felt guilty about the sleepover. I missed my mom, and I wanted to go home that night and cancel the sleepover. But Nanay was persistent about my first ever sleepover. She sang all sorts of lullaby to pacify me, and those were lovely, of course. However, those didn't stop me from wanting to go home. I was equally determined about going home. I was already crying, but not until she asked, do you believe in shokoy? Shokoy is our local term for a merman. A merman, a half fish, half human. As far as I remember, during that time, it was a popular character in primetime TV. So a relative who was able to see one for real gave me so much excitement. So there was a long pause from my crying. Nanay noticed it, and so Nanay continued. My mother, your great grandmother, when she was a young lady, she was courted by a merman. My great grandmother, with her parents, used to live in one of the far-flung barrios in our town. But what amazed me actually was that they lived next to a river. So according to my grandma, when they needed food, they go to the river to fish. When they needed to wash clothes, they needed to wash the dishes. They do it in the river. When they wanted to play, they go to the river. And when they needed to take a bath, they do it at the river. There, the merman saw for the first time my mother. At first sight, he was mesmerized by her beauty, that he started stalking her each and every time my mother came to the river, said Nanay. But theirs was a love story that was not meant to be. A merman and a human? Everyone in the barrio laughed at it. And worse, everyone in the family was so against it. Nanay sounded sad all of a sudden. She continued by describing the merman as an untiring admirer. It was a one-sided love for years, but the merman was unstoppable, she said. Before, Na- Before Nanay could even continue, my mind had started to wonder, how does great-grandma look like? Is she as fair, as skinny, and beautiful as my grandma? How does the merman look like? Are there any good-looking ones of their kind? How does a merman actually look like? To me, it was like a fairy tale, and my imagination started going away from Nanay telling the story. That first night left me wanting for more sleepovers at my Nanay's house. In the following evenings, my Nanay would not be surprised to always find me in her house waiting for her to go to bed. She knew that I was there most of the time for the merman story. Each night, I would say in a shy but brave manner, Nay, remember the story about the merman who courted great-grandmother? Can you tell me about that story once again? Nanay would usually smile or laugh like she found me really adorable in my request. And she was very kind to tell me the story each evening. Each night, I was always full of excitement to hear the same story. The same old story, and all my imagination that went with it did not bore me at all. Until, to my pride, came the time when it was my turn to tell the story to others. I was about to tell the story to a new playmate. I told him, you know what? My great-grandma had a merman suitor. Mermen are real, said my grandma. I was so childishly proud of it. But I ended up so disappointed of myself. Only then did I realize I actually knew only half of the real story. I told my playmate a merman courted my great-grandmother, and that's it. Weeks have passed, and it has been very long since the last time I had a sleepover. I was reminded of how incomplete my knowledge of the real story was. And so, I started asking myself again, what happened to their love story in the end? Another weekend evening, Mommy was again busy. Mommy was barely talking to me again. So, I began to wonder about the merman and told my mom, Mom, may I sleep tonight again at Grandma? I knew Mom had no other choice that night. So again, back beside Nanay on her bed, Nanay told me more about the love story of my great-grandma and the merman. Apparently, great-grandma eventually fell in love with the merman, but her family was so against it. When the merman found out that great-grandma's family are leaving the river to live in the urban for good, he went mad and destroyed the land on which their house stood. Upon hearing that, I went mad as well. I told my grandma how I was starting to hate the merman. The merman was a crazy creature who left the river. It was not safe, I told Nanay. That night, I went on to imagine the bad merman causing more troubles to great-grandma's family. The following night, I decided to sleep at Grandma's house again. Grandma was in good mood. Nanay told me something new about the story. In her last night's story, the merman seemed to be the story's bad guy. Nanay this time was telling a different story. Nanay is telling me again about how great the merman is, that he tried to win my great-grandma's house, and he tried to please her parents, only to get dumped. I was confused, but immediately thought of great-grandma's parents as the real villains. Nanay seemed to like the merman a lot, and was not at all against him for her own mom. So I should not be mad at him, I told myself. Seeking for more answers, I slept at Grandma's house again. It was the third night in a row. Nanay, however, was not feeling well. She prepared a sleeping mat next to her bed and told me to sleep on that mat instead of beside her. That was the first time that Nanay was being so strict about bedtime. She tucked me neatly under my blanket. Just as she was about to tuck herself in, I said, "Nay, would you please tell me more about the story of the merman?" She was already snoring. Nanay was probably already sleepy, but I brought her so many questions for her that night. So I shook her and woke her up. Nanay was already half awake, half snoring, but still trying to give details about the story. I was very disappointed at my grandma that night, but thanks to my own imagination, Grandma owes me a lot today, I thought. But that night, I also somehow realized my grandma's original version of the story had started to bore me. Years have passed. I was already studying in a university in a city 4 hours away from home. I was almost 18 years old then, almost a young adult as they say in our culture. I was miles away from home, but I was very comfortable to be away from home on my own. One early morning, I received a very sad message from home. Mom told me to go home if I can, or just go home as soon as possible. Something happened. Nanay passed away while in a deep sleep. I was like, no, no, this can't be. I felt a blanket of shame covering the entire me. Deep inside, I said, Nanay, I'm sorry. I forgot about you. In the afternoon, I immediately took the bus to the province. It was already nighttime when I got to Grandma's house. My grandma's house was still the same house I used to spend sleep over at, but a lot older. But the night was not as calm as it was back then. I went straight to the house, into the living room, towards Nanay's brightly lit coffin. There, on Nanay's coffin, I saw a picture of an unfamiliar but good-looking man next to my grandma's picture. A little girl next to my grandma's coffin noticed me staring at the same picture. She went closer to the coffin, trying to reach for the picture. "Merman, Merman," she said. Later that night, I learned she was told of the same story once and was shown the picture when she asked what a merman is. mermen were no longer as popular during that time as they were during my time as a child. That ends my story.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, forgive me.
Okay. So this merman was a river merman, not an ocean merman?
It was a river merman.
Ah, in a big river. It must
I
have been
think
it must have been a big river.
must have been because that's where they live as well.
Uh-huh. The mermaids that I know about are all from the ocean, but there are probably some mermaids in the rivers too. So really, what does the merman or mermaid, what does it mean to you? How do you feel about it? What are your associations with the merman or mermaid?
From the well, it's this story is actually a mix of the real story. I mean, the story that was told by my grandma and some creative. I add something creative to it to make it a little more interesting. But the merman, I don't know. The first time I heard about that story, I really felt that he was something important to my grandma.
But
So
yeah, go ahead.
in a way, I was thinking that um, instead of it was a story of my great grandma, it could be that it was a story of my grandma.
But a merman or mermaid is sort of half human, half animal, right? Half
Yeah.
fish.
Yes.
So it's really something from nature.
Yes.
So
And during that time in the Philippines, those kinds of creatures were actually common in TV. So we as children, I don't know, probably we have a strong belief about those characters.
mm-hmm.
But
And
when we grew up, of course, it was a different
but
thing.
I guess in those days there was a lot more nature too, right?
Right.
So it's sort of an imaginary figure mixed with nature. Or do you feel it's an imaginary figure, or do you think the merman was really there?
When I was a child, I really believed that it was real. That's why the story about my playmate that I was supposed to tell the story about, that's a real story. But
Mm-hmm.
then it's also real that I felt frustrated about me telling the story because I didn't get to tell the whole story or the details of it.
Well, it's obviously all mixed in with your love of nature, your love of home, your love of your grandmother.
Yeah.
It's all mixed together, right?
Yes.
Of nature, home, and mother and grandmother. Anybody? I like this term resonations. Resonations mean, does it remind you of anything in your own life, in your own thoughts, in your own imagination? Does anyone resonate in any way with any part of this?
I would like to share, Maricris, I could just connect with your story so well. I enjoyed it so much. Maybe because you were, talking about yourself with the grandma and that the bedtime stories. So it was so beautiful. I could feel back onto the childhood days, and your voice was so. The emotions were so real, and we could connect to it. We could take at least for me. I could get back to my childhood days listening to the magical character stories that my mother used to tell me. So I really enjoyed. Thank you.
Yes, I think we really got in touch with you as a very young person. That character came through, and her sense of wonder about this natural merman. But Maricris, I want you to come again and tell maybe 5 or 6 months from now, maybe in May, I want you to tell this story or some other story with no paper, with no notes, because you'll find it's a totally different experience to tell it, from your memory and visualizing it, as opposed to reading it. Okay,
Yes,
so
I wish I could do that.
good,
I was
wonderful.
really scared about forgetting some parts of it.
Sure, that's fine.
So there,
But
I just made sure, but then I ended up reading all throughout. That's why next time I'll try to do it without the script.
yes, come in May or sometime around then, and as I say, either
But
this
thanks
story.
to everyone.
Yeah, either this story or any other story, but next time really tell it as a storytelling. In storytelling, we visualize it internally, and then we use our expressions and our gestures and our words to help our listeners also visualize it. So we're not depending on the written word for it. We are sharing our internal visualization with our listeners and helping them visualize it too. So good. So that's a great project for you, a 6-month project to prepare a storytelling, either this story or any other. Anybody else? Does anyone else want to say anything about the difference between reading a story and telling a story?
Yes, hello, Eric. I would like to mention this, that when we have a script, somehow we end up thinking that, okay, this is the perfect version. That is what happens to me. And we feel that if I drift from this, then my story won't be a good story. But only we know the script. No one else has read the script. So when we go just by visualization and speaking and all, sometimes the version we end up telling is far better than what we have on the paper. And this we can only experience when we start doing it more and more. Looking in the eyes of the audience, sometimes new words come up, which were not there even during practice. From where have I said this? Sometimes you don't understand, but so perfect that we feel. And later, after the performance, when you go back thinking, I'll capture this in words and write in script, they don't come out like that. So that whole experience, as you said, it is with the listeners. You're together on some journey in that storytelling, in visualization. That does not happen unless we let go of the script. Like we cannot swim even if we are holding the side of the pool with even one fingernail. We have to let go and we can swim. So that is very
Jennifer.
As I was listening to this story, I couldn't help but think of a story that I have recently created and wrestled with. And it's a story about my Uncle Harry, but much of the detail, because it came from the past, it was his story, not my story. And so, and he would tell stories as the family as we were gathered around the kitchen table. So what I did, I would say that I settled down with my chin in my hand as he began his story, and I told it in his voice. And I'm wondering, and this is just a question, if when your grandmother and when you're settling down, you inhabit your grandmother and you tell the story in her voice. Because to me, I have a question about this story. Is the story about the merman, or is it about your deepening relationship and growing love for this wonderful grandmother? And I think if you inhabit her voice, you might find the answer to that question. So that's it. My question is, is the story about the merman or your deepening relationship with your grandmother? Thank you.
Or both.
Or both. Yes, it absolutely can be. Yes, you can't have one without the other. But anyway, that's for you, Maricris, for you to
Thank
discover.
you. Yes, thank you for that. Well, I think it's more of my relationship with my grandmother, because as I mentioned, she acted like my second parent already, our second mother. So up until now, she has passed away back in, I think, 2008. But until now, I still treasure that story from her. And also, my grandmother died without me by her side. So I was really studying in a city far from here. And so when she died, I was not there.
But it's a very good suggestion to tell part of the story in the sense that I said, grandmother, please tell me again about the merman. And then you could say, and my grandmother answered, yes, I'll tell you. And then you could actually speak in the voice of your grandmother. I think that would be very touching.
Yes, it was actually a challenge for me to do that. But my grandmother was actually a soft-spoken woman. So yeah, she's a soft-spoken woman. And yes, next time I'll do better in terms of that.
You could do a soft-spoken, be soft-spoken, but also speak loud enough so that people in the last row of the theater will hear you.
Yeah.
Actors are very skilled, can be very skilled in whispering, but at the same time, people in the last row will hear them if they're projecting in the right way. Barry, what were you going to say?
I put it in the chat. It was just a suggestion from Maricris that there might be an intermediate exercise if you're worried about forgetting parts of your story, to have just a written outline, so that as you're going along, you can just glance down and say, oh yes, I remember to tell that part, but then you're still telling it to your audience in your own words. You're seeing the images yourself, but that gives you a little bit of security that you're not forgetting anything.
That's a good idea, but Maricris, I want you to tell it in May with this or some other story with no notes at all, just from within yourself. You have a lot of time to practice.
Thanks for that, and thanks, by the way, especially Eric, for this opportunity. It's actually my first time, and although I fear that I might not do it well, still I took the opportunity because I just want to somehow overcome it. Mm-hmm. But then I was not so successful, so next time I'll do better.
You were great.
And thanks for everyone for your comment.
Jennifer?
Yes, I don't want you to misunderstand, Maricris. When I say in your grandmother's voice, I don't mean imitate your grandmother's voice. I mean, say it from her perspective. Oh, my child, now a long time ago.
Okay.
Right? So you then become grandmother telling your child self the story. That's really what I meant. And I think it would just add a depth to it. And you did a beautiful job, and well done. It's really nerve-wracking to do what you've just done. So pat yourself on the back.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, now, Hanna, are you here? Your rectangle says Mitcha.
Yeah, that's my husband. The computer.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And let's just figure things out here. Hanna, that'll be wonderful if you tell now. And then Sudhir, you're here. Sudhir Pathak is here. And then Jackson. Jackson, thank you so much for volunteering to tell early, but we didn't need that. And I hope, Jackson, is it okay for you to stay later? Jackson, are you still here?
I'm here. I'll be glad to go whenever.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So the only one who's really missing so far is Mangalam, and maybe she'll appear later. But okay, so now we'll hear from Hanna, then Sudhir and Jackson, and I think Xina is not here yet, but maybe she'll come a little later. Okay, so Hanna, are you telling? Well, please introduce yourself and the story. Go ahead.
I'm a storyteller from Israel, from the city of Herzliya, near the seashore. And I would be glad to tell you the story, which is called The Healing Story. In the old times, where kings, queens, witches, and even dragons were present in people's life, there was one amazing artist, a storyteller, who could tell stories about the kings, the queens, and the witches. Actually, he was a very tall man with a long beard and piercing eyes. He was always carrying on his back a very huge bag. Inside the bag, there were stones. Some of them were simple ones like you find in the fields. Others were precious stones. And the storyteller was traveling from village to village, from city to city, actually towns sometimes, and he used to tell the audience the stories. Actually, no one in any city or any town he visited could lift his big bag, even the strongest man in any place that he visited. But not even to walk with it. It was impossible for any of the strongest men in any city. One day, the storyteller has arrived in the township. He sat in the marketplace. Soon enough, the rumor of his arrival spread all over town. Everybody left their jobs, left whatever chores they were doing during the day, and they all were walking towards the marketplace to hear the storyteller. When they came to the marketplace, it was really packed with people. In a very remote village, two sisters lived. They were only the family of one another. The oldest sister took care of her sick sister, the youngest one. She was coughing a lot, and actually she had a fear that she would die one day from the sickness. On that day, the oldest sister told her younger sister, I'm going into town to buy us some food and some medicine. When she arrived in the town, she saw all the people going towards the marketplace, and she went there. She sat in the last row. She could hardly see the stage, but she was all with the audience. The storyteller always took one stone out of his bag before he started to tell his stories. He would hold it in his palm and then put it into his heart. Then he started to tell the story. The story seemed to have a life of its own. Sometimes his voice was harsh and strong. Sometimes his voice was soft and sweet. The audience was moving up and down with the story. It was like crying and laughing at the same time. The young girl, the older sister, she was hypnotized by the stories. She almost disappeared in them. When the storyteller came towards the end of his performance, he asked the audience whether they wanted some stories that he would tell them. Some suggestions were told by the audience, and he decided to have one last story. He took a stone out of his bag, put it in his palm, and then next to his heart. He told the story personally only to the young girl sitting in the last row. But everybody in the audience was certain that this story was definitely personally for him or for her. Then when he told his story, all the audience, they rose, they clapped their hands for minutes, they were cheering. At the end of his performance, he went all the way to the last row to this young girl. He gave her a stone and he said to her, "Go home, tell your sick sister the story." The girl went home. She was sad and she was upset. When she came in, she said, "My dear sister, I'm sorry, I didn't bring you medicines nor food, but I have a story that I was told to tell you." "Please, please tell me," said the young sister. And she told her the story. There was a silence for a minute. And then the young sick girl said, "My sister, you know, no drink you ever made or prepared for me was as lovely as this one. It quenched my thirst. I feel great. Please tell me again the story." And the sister told the story once again. At the end of this time, the younger sister looked at her and she said, "You know, no food you ever made for me is as tasty as this story. Please, please tell me the third time the story." And she did. This last time, the girl looked at her sister and she said, "You know, I feel like a little medicine is inside me after this third time." And she was very tired. She fell asleep. It was dark. The older sister was sitting next to the window with the stone in her hand. She fell asleep too. She woke up in the early morning's hour and she was frightened because she couldn't hear the cough. She couldn't hear her sister breathing at all. So she kneeled near the bed. She hugged her and she listened to the breath. It was smooth. It was calm. At this moment, a ray of sun spread into the room, and she looked at the stone in her hand. She realized it wasn't simple stone that she was given. It was now a big diamond. Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. So there were two transformations at the end there. The younger sister's body transformed into health and the stone transformed into diamond.
Yes.
And it was all because of hearing and sleeping on that story.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What brought on the transformations was just hearing the story and sleeping on the story.
Mm-hmm.
Many times we say, "I need to sleep on it."
Yeah, that's right.
Because the unconscious works with the story over the night. There's a saying, actually, we work with the story in the daytime and the story works on us in the nighttime.
Probably. I find it with many stories that I tell, yes.
So I find it interesting and appropriate that you didn't tell us what story was being told, right?
No.
It didn't matter. It was just, it didn't matter.
Yeah, it was the essence of the story that made this transform. Yeah.
It was just a story that had emotion, that had the poignancy of life in it. You know that everyone know that funny word that we never know how to pronounce? Poignant. Maybe it's a French word, and I never know whether I should pronounce the G or not. Poignant or something like that, but it just means the experience of living and hoping and having an urge for this or that, and the vulnerability of whether it's going to come true or not. And a wonderful storyteller will bring that quality into a story so that we feel those emotions and those ups and downs and twists and turns, and really help us feel ourselves, right? But can you say anything more about how a story can be medicine?
I find that when I tell stories in my program, in my performance, people come to me afterwards and say that with sparkling eyes, they say that it took them into some layers inside them that they even didn't think that they would relive them, which is to me a very great compliment. And they come with sparkling eyes. Sometimes they even cry a little, and they remember something of their childhood that made them feel whatever through my story. So it's to me, it's a great satisfaction.
So just going into the imagination and memory, that seems to be healing in itself.
Sometimes, yes, it has that power, I believe.
Anybody else have any thoughts about how this can be healing or therapeutic in some way? Donna?
It's lovely because sometimes the storyteller is healed by the telling, and is also, as a storyteller, one goes through stages with a story. Sometimes the story speaks to us because we need to hear it, because there's something in us that will be healed by the hearing of the story and the telling of the story and the living with the story. So I really loved your story. It was so touching, because you're right, a little stone, and you put it in your heart, and that's what it is about stories. Thank you. I really loved that story.
But how did the storyteller know that the older sister in the back row had a younger sister at home?
That is, you asked me, so I think it's a very good question. I think that he was a very unusual person, and he could read through people, and therefore he knew that there was something wrong, and he told the story especially directly to this girl. It's knowing people, it's knowing, she was all hypnotized by the stories altogether, but he felt that there was something wrong, and so he told her, go and tell your story, to your sick sister.
Sometimes fortune tellers can sense these things.
That's right.
Okay. Anybody else? Any thoughts, resonations?
I wish to quickly share, Eric. Okay, the story was very powerful, of course, no doubt on it. But also when Misha, you have been talking about the stones, the little stones that he keeps on his heart. It somehow feels, as storytellers, how is important for us to tell it from heart, and as listeners also listen it from your heart. So these two things is there, and as storytellers, something like magical, we have to tell stories for the audience. So somehow there is a connection that maybe that kind of it, I could derive it as a storyteller. What is our responsibility, how we need to act in front of our audience. So from the heart, it may not be just the stone, but just our anything, it turns into magical, and a simple stone becomes a diamond, meaning that we become a treasure in ourselves within. So thank you so much for sharing. It was so powerful. Thank you, Eric.
The stone becoming a diamond is a type of alchemy, right? Alchemy is usually that various metals are somehow transformed into gold, and it's a symbolic activity. But this is a different type of that kind of transformation. Okay. Thank you very much. So now, Sudhir, you are here. Please introduce yourself and the story, and take the stage.
Thank you very much, Eric, first of all, for giving the opportunity to speak. And good evening, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. I am Sudhir Pathak. I am an IT professional. I am also a public speaker and a storyteller as well. My story today is you always have a choice in life. I was around 25 years old when I completed my master's in computers application. Unfortunately, I didn't get a job immediately, and I was looking for it ferociously. I knocked every door. As I was looking for a good job, I ended up working in a decent call center. So I started working over there. One night while I was working over there, I started feeling a bit of dizziness and bit of nausea as well. I literally ignored it, thinking that it could be the night shift that I was working, and that could be the reason for feeling the dizziness. As I ignored and I went back to my shifts again, after 15 days, I felt this dizziness and nausea once again. And this time, the dizziness was slightly higher as compared to the previous one. So the next morning, I, along with my father, visited the hospital and told that what exactly am I feeling and how exactly what did I feel some 15 days back itself. So they asked me to perform certain tests. I underwent certain tests, and I continued with my normal life. After 15 days, the test reports came back, and I went back to the doctor. The first question after seeing the reports, the doctor asked me, "Are you insured?" I said no. Okay. And the second question he asked, "How soon can you be admitted to hospital?" And now I was thinking that there's something sincerely wrong, something seriously wrong, and I brought the courage and I asked, "What is the problem?" He said, "You have to be admitted to hospital because you have damaged, both of your kidneys are damaged. So you have to undergo certain tests again. You have to be admitted to hospital, and then we will see what can happen." This was a shock of the moment. You can imagine a 24, 25-year-old person coming out of a college, looking for a job, looking for the career with such a bright light ahead, and all of a sudden he faces something as dark as possibly death. And then I just took a look towards my father. He was literally shaking and about to bog down as well. I was also about to cry, but I then brought back my courage, and I brought him in the courage as well. And then we went back home. This was required to be told to my mother as well, and it was altogether a different environment when I told this to my mother. Having said that, the days passed. I further got admitted to hospital. And I always observe this thing, that whenever life throws you challenges, it brings you from everywhere. So I was looking for a decent job, ended up in a call center. On the very same evening, I got an offer as well when I was asked to go back. I was asked to come back for an HR round of interview for the kind of a job I was looking for. So I had to choose now whether I need to go to the hospital or to go for a job interview. But this time I was left with a choice where I need to go to the hospital. I went to the hospital, got admitted. A lot of tests happened, and ultimately doctor told me that you have to undergo a kidney transplant sometime in the future. The time has not arrived yet, but it will certainly happen. So that was the time when basically things started falling in the wrong side, because I was so much onto my own. I was thinking that I don't have any life ahead. I was just thinking about death. And in the year 2007 and 8, I finally got into that stage wherein I was required to get admitted to hospital. I was required to undergo dialysis as well. So the people who do not know what dialysis is, it's a procedure wherein you get admitted to hospital for 4 hours temporarily. They prick needles in your hand, and your whole of your blood gets filtered. It's not only the blood, it's also the vitamins, the nutrients, the minerals comes out, and once you come out of that 4-hour procedure, you become very weak. So I used to go this for a couple of days initially, and then 3 days in a week. So as I said, I was just thinking that how will I be coming out of it, or whether I will be coming out of it or not. To me, it was all death. One particular morning, or rather evening, when I was coming out of my procedure, I saw some bunch of students who were just enjoying life, and I was just seeing them happy, and I literally felt that, see, these are the people who are as young as me, and they are just seeing life ahead of them, and I'm the kind of a person who is just thinking about death. I went back home. I didn't sleep whole night, and I cried a lot whole night. But during those crying, and as I didn't sleep, something miraculous was happening. I don't know where and how, but something miraculous was happening. I woke up the next morning with more energy, and I this time I decided to choose to give it a fight, even if it is a death scaring at me. I didn't have any option. Nobody is willing to donate his or her kidneys to me. I'm staring at death, but I still want to give it a fight. That's what I thought. So this time I chose to give it a fight, and I moved ahead. And as I chose to, go into this state, I also started finding that a lot of things started feeling at the right place, which were not happening earlier. I started. There were people who were not helping me at my job. I was somehow surviving at my job. I had a wonderful relationship with someone whom I was planned to get married, and then she left me at the time when I was needing her the most. But then, as I started thinking the positive aspect, as I started forgiving people, as I started thinking life ahead, I started finding right set of people coming to me, helping me. I found correct right set of doctors as well coming, and they were helping me and saying, okay, let's see what we can do for you. And this movement went on. And unfortunately, after 4 years of struggle, it does not mean that in the 4 years I didn't fail. I failed miserably at job. Number of times I stared at death again. But these 4 years I did not give up. I just thought that, okay, even if it is a death, I will take it upfront. Will try to sail it through. So after 4 years, some miracles continued, and one of my cousin donated. This was in the year 2011. And then I underwent a transplant, and I came out successfully. And then I started realizing that it was my thoughts, it was my mindset which possibly changed all of the scenarios which were possibly going in the wrong direction. And then I started realizing that I always had a choice. I had a choice to get into an interview or to get into a hospital. I chose to go to hospital, which was right. I had a choice whether I want to stare at death with a lame person, or I want to stare at death with eye to eye. I chose the other side. I started finding the right people, right person, right situations, right happenings. Even after the transplant, there were a lot of challenges, not finding the right matches, right girl, and I again chose to give it a fight, and to stare life at the right perspective. I found the right soulmate at that time, and life continued. I found the right job as well, some opportunities to share my stories as well. And interestingly, I got a number of opportunities earlier as well with Eric to speak, and didn't share this story earlier. It was a different story, but I think it's all in the right direction. I'm still getting lots of ups and downs in the life, but I always put this thing in my mind that I always have a choice. Yes, choice could go wrong. It's not necessary that I should be taking a right decision all the time. It could be wrong as well, but I always have a choice, and which is a privilege, till the time you're in this earth, being a human. So just wanted to cascade this message to everyone that we always have a choice, irrespective of whatever situation you are in. Thank you very much, Eric, for the opportunity again.
Thank you. So the real turning point in there was one day you saw this group of, were they college students, or they were young adults just laughing and not a worry in the world, right? They were just in a different world from you. For you, the whole world was, the weight of the world was on your shoulders, and you were, considering your own mortality. But this group of young people, they were just laughing, and somehow that served as a turning point for you. How did that do it? Can you tell us more about that transformation that was triggered by that moment?
Eric, it definitely was triggered by that moment. But if I introspect now, or if I try to reflect it now, that moment was just a moment which pushed me towards that, because otherwise I was thinking, whenever I was thinking happier people, I was thinking why they are happy and why am I not. So my thought process was why rather than how I can be happy and those kind of things. So my question was more of why me, why I am suffering, why am I going through this, why life is doing this to me. My questions were more of whys. It's not like that I didn't see the younger people earlier. It's not like that I didn't see younger people laughing earlier. But I think this time it was at the saturation. I noticed them more carefully, and when I went back home, I brought those images in my thought as well, and I carried it on. That's why I use the word miraculously, because sometimes I also wonder how did it happen. To me, it was a miracle only. But when I think, I feel it was not a miracle in all honesty. It was something which I was thinking constantly, and one particular incident hit me so hard that it pushed me to bring a different perspective to life.
There was a shift inside you.
True.
I think it would be very interesting for you to tell the story from in the third person. In other words, you told it today in first person. I did this, I did that. If you would project this story, this character onto an external character, a young man, and tell the story of this young man who is really you, I think it would give you a very interesting, different perspective on the story and on your own character. You might try it sometime.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely would like to try it, Eric. Thank you very much for the suggestion. It opens up a different aspect of telling a story as well.
Anybody? Any resonations? Comments, questions? Jennifer, please.
I just have a very short suggestion. There are moments in that story lovely moments when you have the interchange with your father and then later with your mother. And I would love if you could maybe paint the picture of your father's sadness so that we get to see it. You tell us about it, but you don't let us see it. And I think that would really lend a depth to it. And when you show us your mother's face, describe it. Similarly, when you see those young people, you saw them in your head, but you didn't allow us to see them. We could imagine what they looked like, but just a few, describe what they were doing, what they were, were they sharing a joke? Did a young woman throw back her head so that you could see her beautiful white teeth, her flowing hair, or, a young man, what did he look like? Doubled over. I don't know. I mean, that's obviously, you'll be able to recreate that, but just a little suggestion so that I think that it would really add a great deal to that powerful story.
Well accepted, Jennifer. Thank you very much for that. Sincere gratitude for that. I'll take a note of that.
Yes, again, to speak in the voices of different characters and move as different characters would move. So you're showing us that world instead of just giving us a kind of summary about it. But Jennifer, you must have a background in the theater. Not only is your voice resonant, but your thinking is very theatrical.
Sorry to disappoint you. I taught 8th grade English, where drama and humor saved my life on a number of occasions.
But you haven't been on the stage. You must have. You must.
I have in my later years, but I have been a professional storyteller for many years.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great. Okay. Anyone else want to say anything? All right. Xina, you've come. Good. So that's fine. Mangalam is still not here. Mangalam must have Maybe she's having a power cut or something, but that's okay because as is usually the case, we're going a little overtime. But because Mangalam is not here, we won't go overtime. So great. So now it's going to be Jackson and then Xina. Am I pronouncing your name right, Xina? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Xina, your rectangle says you're in Amsterdam. And Jackson, where are you? Where are you?
I'm in United States near Cape Cod.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, please introduce yourself and take the stage.
Okay, well, I've chosen to do some really short pieces, like about 2 minutes. So I definitely will do 2. If there's time at the end, I'd be glad to do a last one that's about 2 minutes as well. The first one is very traditional. It's in cultures all over the world. Aesop's got a hold of it. It's about the lion and a mouse. And a friend of mine put a musical version of it. His name was Sandy Pliskin, and then I've further interpreted it. So it goes like this. Oh, once there was a little mouse, and his name was Androcles. He'd wander around the countryside, and he'd go wherever he pleased. One day he found a golden mound, nothing gave him pause, till he found that mound was a sleeping lion, and he wound up in its claws. Just at that moment, the lion awoke, and he gave a mighty roar. And Androcles said, Mr. Lion, of you I do implore, if you should choose to turn me loose, I'd be grateful evermore. And someday I'll pay you back, you'll see, that desperate rodent swore. Oh, the lion looked at Androcles, and he couldn't help but laugh. Don't you know that I'm king of all that could ever cross my path? You're free to go, but don't be slow, 'cause I just might change my mind. Don't pretend I'd ever need help from a pipsqueak of your kind. So the lion let him loose, and his demise it was forestalled. And Androcles made himself scarce, though he always did recall the debt he owed when the lion bestowed upon him his release. How he'd pay that lion back befuddled, our friend Androcles. Sometime later, while wandering, how that mouse loved to explore, he heard a sound, his ears perked up to a most familiar roar. 'Cause upside down, way off the ground, trapped inside a net, was that very lion he'd swore to help, and he never did forget. Brave Androcles said, never fear, for help is on its way. He jumped up, gnawed away at that rope that held that lion at bay. At last the rope gave way and broke, and the lion was set free. And that grateful lion thanked his stars that he'd spared little Androcles. So let this be a lesson to those currently in command. You might choose to show some mercy, though you have the upper hand. Though the lion may roar with sharp claws gore, while the mouse can only squeak. Still someday you might find it's the mouse who's mighty, and the lion who is weak. So I am scheduled to do one other short one, and then we can talk for a bit, and there's time I'll do another one. This next one is, I love finding stories that say a whole lot in a really short amount of time. And this one, I think the original version I heard of it was like easily under a minute, maybe a half minute or so. And I heard it from Maria Lobiando, and she had heard it from her grandfather. And I've expanded it a little bit, but it's got, again, it has roots all over the world. There was a farmer out working in his field along a road that was rarely traveled, but one day a wayfaring stranger came by, so he waved to him. The man didn't even wave back, was just going to walk by, so he approached him and said, "Where you be coming from, sir?" Grasberg. Oh, well, what's it like there? It's a hard scrabble place. People don't have much, and they're fighting each other for every little scrap there is. Talking behind your back, stab you there if you're not careful. Couldn't wait to leave there fast enough. But tell me, what's it like up in the town ahead? Well, I think you'll find that it's pretty much the same there and wherever you go. So he went back to work. And later, another stranger was walking by. He waved him. This one waved back. Met him halfway across the field. Said, "Where do you be coming from, sir?" "Ah, Grasberg." "Oh, what's it like there?" "Oh, it's a hard scrabble place. People don't have much, but they're grateful for what they do have. Everybody's looking out for each other. They've got each other's back. They share that right off. Their clothes right off their back for if you needed it." A lot of nice people there. I'll be sad to leave there and hope to come back sometime. But tell me, what's it like up in the town ahead? I think you'll find it's pretty much the same there and wherever you go. So that story is one that could be called A Tale of Two Cities, but I like to call it A Tale of One City by Two Men. And a lot of people have, it brings to mind a quote that is credited to a lot of different people. Anais Nin has a version of it, Stephen Covey, but it has its original roots in the Talmud that we see the world not as it is, but how we are. So those are the two that I'm scheduled to perform, and we can chat a bit, and maybe there'll be time for another.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now that is a very different type of storytelling. Well, we've had a wide variety of types of storytelling tonight, but that is very different from everything else we've seen. First of all, you're moving around. You're not just a talking head. So we're getting you from the waist up, and you have a black curtain behind you. Some people would call this a form of monotheater, or one person theater. So that was wonderful. The first piece you did, it rhymed, and in both pieces the words were fully memorized, right?
They are in this case. It's a little bit different each. The first one is set, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's a very different form of storytelling than visualizing and improvising the words, but great fun. Were you included in that promotional video the National Storytelling Network did like 10 years ago, where I think you were singing, "I was right, I was wrong."
Yeah.
That was a great one. And I'll never do this when money is involved.
Wow, you have a good memory, Eric. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, I've shown that video to a lot of students. Do you remember? That?
I was right, I was wrong all along. Yeah.
Yes. So you're also doing a lot of mime along with it.
Some stories I tell with sign language, and I move a lot. Yeah, my background is in movement.
Anyone thoughts? You also use that kind of theatrical method of speaking on a diagonal from one character to another. The mouse said to the lion, "I'll help you one day." And the lion said, "You could never help me, you're so small." Right? That's one option we have as a storyteller, to do this diagonal. I often encourage storytellers to look straight at the listener and treat the listener as the other character, where the mouse said to the lion, "I will help you one day." And the lion said, "How could you ever help me? You're just a little mouse." So these are different methods of doing characterization. The diagonal, the mouse said, then the lion said, that's more like what you get in theater with actors on a stage having a relationship. One actor is having a relationship with the other, or one character is having a relationship with the other character. Whereas if you treat your listener as the character, it's a different style.
Yeah, I actually carefully pick times when I'm looking at the audience as the narrator. So if I'm narrating, I'm hopefully doing what you're describing, looking at you, and then when I'm in a character, then can have.
But you don't usually look at a listener when you're playing a character. You don't usually put the listener in the position of the other character.
Yeah,
that's not your thing. Mm-hmm. All
but,
right. Well, everyone, there's a lot of Jackson Gillman is a famous performer. For those of you who don't know, and a lifetime of theater and storytelling stagecraft goes into what he does. Okay, so please give us one more.
Okay, this one again was I think it's really short, and I came across it from another storyteller, John Sanders, who was an aficionado of a writer named Gianni Rodari. And Rodari was very famous all over the world. He was an Italian writer, lived in the middle of the 20th century, and his work was translated into languages all over the place, but never in English. And I think he was kind of blacklisted because of his politics at the time, but his stories are amazing, and they finally have come out with an English edition. It's finally out just recently this fall, but it's the story is called 1 and 7. I met a child who was 7 children. His name was Paolo. I'd like to show you where he lived. And he lived in Rome. His father was a trolley conductor, and his mother was a baker. She also lived in Paris. Her name was Chantal. Her father worked in a car factory, and her mother cleaned houses. But he also lived in Berlin, and his father was a cellist, and his mother was a doctor. She also lived in Moscow, was raised by her father, who was a bricklayer. He also tutored math. And he also lived in New York. He was called Malik. He lived with his grandparents, and he helped out in their convenience store. Now, how many have I said so far? That's 5. There's 2 more. One lived in Shanghai, and she was called Chen. Her father was a fisherman, and her mother sold the fish at market. And the last one was Juan, and he lived in Buenos Aires. And both of his mothers, they painted houses. Now, there's Paolo, Chantal, Kurt, Sasha, Malik, Chen, and Juan. There were 7 children. But they were also the same child. One who was 8 years old, already knew how to read and write, and can ride their bicycles without holding the handlebars. Paolo had reddish hair. Chantal was brunette. Kurt was blonde, but they were the same child. Malik's skin was dark. Chen's was lighter, but they were the same child. The movies that Juan saw were in Spanish, but the ones that Sasha saw were in Russian. But they laughed. in the same language. Now, all 7 of them are grown, and they can't imagine making war on one another because they're the same child. So again, I love these stories that are just so rich with so little. And then I heard that story and I was like, I don't know, I get choky just thinking about it. Yeah.
Very nice. Loved it, Jackson. Very nice story.
Again, I do a lot of personal stories, but I've been lately choosing to perform these little sort of vignettes. But so it is in a different style than we're doing today, but I thought I'd break it up a little bit.
Very touching. So a number of the stories tonight have really, reminded us of our humanity, of our poignant, vulnerable, hopeful selves. By the way, are you using a collar mic?
No, it's just my camera, my laptop mic.
Ah, it's picking up your voice very well.
Yeah.
Because many times I'm afraid that if I do move, a few feet away from my laptop, the audio won't be clear. But yours is totally clear. Okay, so that's a lesson to us. One more reason we should get up and move around. All right. Anybody else? Any thoughts either about the content or the form or anything?
Rick, thank you for bringing such global great tellers. And Jackson Gillman, I have already met him in Wisconsin. Thank you so much for giving us yet another great performance. Such a learning, such a powerful stories you brought us. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. I remember you very well, Srividya. Yeah, and I loved your storytelling.
Srividya, you went to Wisconsin, was it like 2 years ago?
Yes, in 2019, I was privileged to be part of their confabulation, and it was a privilege to see him on the stage and everyone doing their personal stories. And he came in and he was with all power, and how we, Indians, we do the other dramatic kind of storytelling, and he was there with that kind of energy. I really enjoyed. I really connected so well. So thank you once again for bringing such beautiful stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Srividya.
Great. Okay, well, our final storyteller and story of the evening is from Xina, and you are in Amsterdam. So what time is it for you there, Xina?
It's 3:30, around 3:30.
In the afternoon?
In the afternoon, yes.
Not so bad.
Quite dark today, so.
Okay, please introduce yourself further and please tell us a story.
My name's Xina. I'm a storyteller in the Netherlands. I mainly tell in English because it's my mother tongue. I grew up in the States. And I was inspired by the theme of an important conversation. And I judge this as one of the most important conversations I had as a child. So I'm sitting on a bench and my little legs are dangling off the ground. Next to me is my little sister with her legs dangling. Next to her is our uncle. And on the other side of me is my aunt and my 5 cousins. In front of us is another bench of people. And in front, another bench of people, another bench of people, another bench of people. And in front of them is a man in a long white gown with gold and green embroidery. Behind him are giant golden angels with trumpets. And on his left is a statue of Jesus. And Jesus doesn't look very happy. And it's probably because he has nails in his hands and he's against, I'm worried you can't hear me if you're leaning forward. Can you all hear me well? Yeah, perfect. He has nails in his hands and he's got a thorn crown and he's bleeding. On the other side of the priest is another statue of Jesus, baby Jesus being held by Maria. Baby Jesus doesn't look very happy either, and that might be because he has no arms. The statue has survived hundreds of years of wars and floods and fires, but baby Jesus's arms didn't survive. This is the church in which my family has been baptized, married, and buried for generations. And the reason my sister and I are sitting between my aunt and my uncle is because we don't know how to behave in church. And the reason we don't know is we're not supposed to be in church because my mother doesn't like church. But we're with my aunt and uncle and they took us straight to church. And it's really hard to behave in church. I don't know if you've ever been in church, but it's complicated because sometimes you have to stand up and sometimes you have to sit down and sometimes you have to sing and sometimes only the choir sings. And most of the time you have to be quiet, but sometimes you have to talk. Like when the priest says, "And God be with you," then you have to say, And the other reason it's hard to behave in church is because it's really, really boring. And now luckily we're at the end of church, and I know it. We're nearly at the end because we're at the part that I hate the most. It's the part where the priest holds up a cookie and he breaks the cookie, and then everybody stands up to get a cookie, and my aunt goes with her finger, and my sister and I have to stay sitting down while everybody else gets a cookie. And I just found out why we can't have a cookie. My cousin explained it. It's because we weren't baptized. We didn't do communion. We don't go to church. My parents are getting a divorce. We're sinners and we're going to go to hell. And I don't think it's fair that I have to go to hell. A week later, we're back in church, this time with my mother. And the reason my mother is in church is because the priest is her big brother. And now when he holds up a cookie, my aunt doesn't have to do the finger because my mother holds onto our wrists and we sit there, the three sinners, while everybody walks by and looks at us, judging us. So when church is over, my family goes next door to my uncle's house to eat pie, and I stay there kicking the back of my bench, furious. My uncle comes out, he's now dressed like a normal human being again, and he asks me what's wrong. And so I tell him, I don't think it's fair that I have to go to hell just because of all these things that I have no control over. And as I just spurt out everything that's bothering me, my uncle does this thing that grown-ups often do when you share your innermost fears and worries with them. He laughs and he goes, and rubs my forehead. And then he tells me, "Xina, you don't need to worry. God is a God of love. And he will bring you into heaven if you are a good person. And I know you are a good person, so you don't need to worry." And you know what? And he disappears off behind the church somewhere. And fluffy furry elephant. And one of us goes, "Ba, ba, 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 ba," and we stand and sit a few times. And then we do this to the teddy bears and we walk by judging them as we get a cookie. We take turns back and forth, back and forth. And the cookies, by the way, super disappointing. They taste like cardboard. They're just the worst cookies ever. And we get pain in our stomachs because we're eating so many cookies, but each one we eat, we're one step closer to heaven. Then my cousin comes in, and when he sees us, I'm like, really like, "We're going to heaven, you were wrong, nah, 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 nah." But he starts laughing and he's like, "Was that bag open or shut?" I was like, "Oh, it was a brand new bag, completely shut." And then he says, "Well, then they don't count because they weren't consecrated." I'm like, "What does that mean?" It's like, well, first the priest has to bless the hosties, that's what they're called. And when they're blessed, they become the flesh of Christ. And then when you eat them, they count. Now I need to process two things in this moment. One, my family eats Jesus. And two, my uncle, he tricked me. And if he tricked me about the cookies, maybe he also tricked me about going to heaven. So I need to get a second opinion from a grown-up. I go into the house and I find my mother in the kitchen getting a piece of pie. And I share my question with her, and my mother listens and she says, "Xina, what you need to understand is that the church is an oppressive, patriarchal organization that has been exploiting women and the poor since the beginning. And I've heard this story a lot of times before, and I know it's not an answer to my question. So I leave my mother tirading against the church in the kitchen. And the next day, with my paternal grandparents, I go to my grandmother. And she is the sweetest, kissing, giving cookies kind of grandmother. And I share my problem with her. And she pinches my cheek and she says, Uksini Winnie, nobody would do that to such a beautiful child. And if anyone wants to send you to hell, just send them to me and I'll give them a good whooping. And I realize my grandmother doesn't seem to understand how heaven and hell works. I'm pretty sure she can't give God a whooping. So I go to the next grown-up, getting a little frustrated. The next one, the third opinion, is my father. My father is a philosopher and he's sitting at his desk working, and I climb onto the chair behind the big desk and I share my problem with my father, and he listens carefully. He's silent for a moment and he says, you know, it's important to understand that heaven and hell are based on the concepts of eternity. And we know, as science has proven, that nothing is eternal. Even the universe in which we live is finite. Henceforth, if heaven and hell are based on a concept that only exists in our minds, heaven and hell are only concepts in our minds. I'm 7. This doesn't help me at all. So I finally realized there's only one person I can ask that might give me the real answer, and that's my grandfather. And my grandfather is not the kind of man who puts you on your knee and kisses and says, I love you. He's the kind of man that says scary truths and doesn't say things to make you feel better, like most grown-ups. So I go into his workshop where he's working on wood and I pull on his jacket and I share in my best Flemish with Opa my problem. And my grandfather gets down and he looks at me and he says, Xina, your uncle was right. God is a God of love. And one day we will all be together. Me and your grandmother and our little son we lost in the war, Laurent, and your father and your sister, all together in the future in heaven. But there's something about the look on his face, and I feel this tension in my stomach and this knot in my chest, and I think for the first time, my grandfather isn't actually telling me the truth, but saying something to make me feel better. But I do what my family does really well. I take this horrible feeling and I push it away. And over the years, in the next decade or so, every time me not going to church or not being baptized or my parents' divorce comes up, I take that horrible feeling and I push it away. I push it away and pretend it's not there. Until I reach that age where it's really hard to push things away, you know, your teens. Somewhere around 18, 19, my grandfather brings something up again in this theme and I explode and I cuss at him like, what the fuck? This is ridiculous. You and your God of love, you are judging me all the time. You don't even believe it. And I just tirade and storm out of the room. And then for the next decade, my grandfather and I, we push it away and pretend it didn't happen. Now he lives in a nursing home. And I come to visit him in his single room and he's fast asleep. So I sit on a chair and I start reading. And when I look up, I see him looking at me and he has the softest look on his face. And he says, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it? How much one human being can love another. And it's the closest he will ever come to saying, I love you. And then he asks me if I remember this argument, this me screaming at him more than a decade ago. And I tell him I do. And he says, well, I've been thinking about it a lot. And I've talked to my priest. And I honestly do believe that God is a God of love. And if you are a good person, and I believe you are a good person, even if you are living with your boyfriend and not married, you will be welcome into heaven and we will all be together. Me, your grandmother, our little son, Laurent, your father, your sister. In the future, we will be together in heaven. And I look at my grandfather and I feel that same tension in my chest and that same knot in my stomach. And I do what I think he's doing. I say the opposite of what I believe. I say, yeah, Granddad. Yeah, Opa. I really do think one day in the future, we will all be together. And that is where our story ended. At least that's where I thought it ended, until the very first time I told this story on stage to an audience. And as I got to the end of the story, I looked out at all these faces and I realized My grandfather and I had not been lying to each other. And my father, in his own way, had also been telling the truth. Because that night, as today, all of them, my aunt with the finger, my uncle the priest, my mother tirading against the church, my grandmother squeezing my cheek, my grandfather, their little son Laurent, all of them were together in all of our minds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. You know, the thing to me is that all of these characters, all of these voices are together in your mind eternally. So it was very touching and interesting to experience how you have experienced being pulled in so many different directions, you know, with different points of view expressed by these different loved ones. Each one was trying to pull you to believe, to have a different belief system. And you were in the middle of it all.
As is often the case with children.
Mm.
Very nice story, Xina, and I really loved your narration. And you brought out all the personalities and how they affect children. Very nice, a complete performance. Very nice.
Thank you.
I think absolutely heartfelt, very moving, and very thought-provoking at the same time. It's an amazing combination to be moving and thought-provoking at the same time. Thank you.
Yes, in the process of identity creation, we are pulled in all different directions, and somehow we have to at some point say, I believe this, I don't believe this, this is me, and I'm sure you've done that, and maybe that's a story for a different performance.
Mm-hmm.
But this was chapter 1 of the position that you found yourself in. But I certainly want to hear the next chapter of the more details of what you decided, you know, how you shaped your identity and your life. Each one of us is a contested space where, you know, different ideologies, different religions, different political parties, different corporations. Each one of them wants us to go their way. And part of living is just deciding which program to go along with.
Yeah, I have a fictional tale which I mentioned answers that question of where I went in the search of heaven and hell and where my space is in that. Yeah.
Oh, well, you made it as a fictional story.
I have a fictional story which I imagine gives my clear view on what religion means to me, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So for that story, you decided to make it a fictional story. In other words, to create an external character who was sort of your alter ego?
No, it was more that I had an experience that to me was the awakening moment. And that experience, for me, stories tend to grow. So I take that experience, I ask what it is, and over time it became a story, and it took like 8 months to grow. I don't so much sit down and decide this is what I'm making, more go for walks, ask questions, figure out what's happening, wait for answers to come. And some stories come as true stories and some stories come as fictional. And every time, even the fictional ones, you look back and you're like, oh wait, that's actually about me, my life, my experiences.
Well, by true stories, you mean for personal experience stories.
Yeah.
So some are personal experience, some are projected onto external characters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, anyone want to say anything about this this storytelling or any of the other storytellings we have tonight? See, I don't like to call storytellings performances because performances seem a little distant. You know, storytelling is more intimate somehow and more real than a performance. Galen, Nazreen, Judith, we haven't heard a word from any of you. Do any of you want to say anything about this storytelling or any other tonight? Judith, go ahead.
I was just writing in the chat. Thank you so much, Eric, for organizing this, for the new stories that we're hearing and the wonderful styles of telling. Jackson's pauses and looking at the audience. I'm sharing something special with you. We're just brilliant. And I will never forget Xina's "the worst cookies in the world." That will be with me forever. So thank you, Eric, and thank you for all the tellers. I'm sorry I came in late, but I've enjoyed every minute. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll meet next month, the first Monday in January, and then we have the month of February with 4 weekends of. Over the 4 weekends, it's about 65 different storytellers and 25 different workshops. And it's the same it's the same email group that is being used for these Monday events. The same email group will be used for that Chennai Storytelling Festival. So, so stay tuned. The theme of the festival is ways that story can be medicine for healing, for growing, for maturing. So we'll give that topic a real good think from lots of different angles. Yes, Galen?
I want to offer my thanks to Eric and to all of you tellers, and to say that I was reminded once again that stories really are healing diamonds. They are medicine. And that when we listen, we're clearly here from all over the world, but we are all one listener. And we are all one family when a story is told and when a story brings it together. And that's, to me, the true diamond in every story. Its power to do exactly that. And as we've all said, to touch the heart as well as open the mind. And I'm so glad that we have chosen to tell stories, speaking of choice, and to listen to stories, because it's stories that are the shortest route to bringing us together with ourselves and together with one another. And this is what the world needs now. So thank you, Eric, and thank you all you tellers and all you listeners for this wonderful time together.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'll put the recordings of these on YouTube and send the links. And get ready for February.
I also have had many of those awful cookies, Xina. Week after week after week. We're going to go straight to hell for saying this, but yes, they are cardboard. And that's the truth.
Okay, so we say good night or good morning or farewell for now.